This is Charlie Kao with Travel Mall Media Group in Fort Worth, Texas, at the Airline Payment Summit with Masha Cilliers, who's with Payment Options of UK. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us a little bit what Payment Options does and a little bit about your background, please.
So Payment Options is a consulting firm which I've started nearly 4 years ago now. The design is to help companies understand how to streamline and optimize their online payments, how to use the correct payment methods in relevant markets, which providers to choose, why to choose them, so I tend to work with both the retailers, airlines, so the merchants, and also with the payment providers, trying to kind of mediate the requirements and the products to help everybody get to a better payment experience. My background in payments starts from 10 years at Visa in the 90s. Afterwards I worked at Microsoft for 5 years helping Microsoft build a payment acceptance worldwide, which indeed was a challenge because there was less knowledge at the time about different markets behaving. For example, when we were selling Xbox in Japan, the sales were really low. And we couldn't quite understand why it was, but then it boiled down to the fact that we weren't offering local payment methods, which is a convenience store payment method, which in America obviously wasn't at all mainstream. So after that I worked for a number of large payment providers, Cybersource, Global Collect, most recently Data Cash. And after years of experience, I felt that consulting would give me a good opportunity to share my experiences with all the interested parties, and also to learn a lot more about the industry. Being a consultant, I get involved in a lot of really different projects, so I gain a lot more experience. So as far as most recently, Payment Options has been working with clients ranging from large institutions such as Visa and Barclays in the UK, but also a lot of startups. As everybody knows, fintechs had an explosion of startups, but there's a lot of companies that will innovate in payments and then realise that there's a lot of constraints, both practical and regulatory. So I find that I'm helping them to find the right path in that myriad of problems.
What are the challenges and opportunities that these new startups are capturing?
Everybody's after the consumer experience. So if you look at the more traditional payment methods on the mobile, for example, putting a credit card number really doesn't work. Neither does 3D Secure to a satisfaction of the consumer. Technology is there now to support a much better consumer experience, consumer journey, true omni-channel, that you can look up products and buy one channel, buy them by another, get delivered it by third, and have a customer support query by fourth. However, payments is a highly regulated market as well. So for many startups, I see the challenges when they it's good to innovate without the borders. So they come up with great ideas and spend a lot of time and often money to launch those, only to realise that they may be an absolute roadblock because they need to obtain certain licenses in order to, for example, transfer funds and own the funds, even be that for a few seconds in transit, but that requires specific regulation. Now, there's also obviously challenges between doing the work between international markets, because each market will have different regulatory requirements. There's different data protection laws. We've recently had a big knock on the safe harbour protection. Very often those will become big burdens that small startups can't address. So I see that we need to help guide them in that innovation. Although it's good to innovate without the restrictions, you need to understand what the skeleton is within which you can actually work.
Would you say that the payment solutions industry is at the early and fragmented stage?
I would say it's going through its kind of secondary fragmented stage. I'll explain. I feel that so about early 2000s, when we had kind of the whole internet bubble, there was a lot of startups. So, when I worked for some of those providers, such as CyberSource, in fact, CyberSource, Global Collect, and DataCash all got acquired, but large companies. So, Visa bought DataCash, Visa bought CyberSource, MasterCard bought DataCash, and Global Collect recently been acquired by Ingenico. So all huge players. But these companies have grown. So what's happening is, as the big providers grow, they obviously get a lot more processes in place, there's a lot more red tape, things get slower. So the merchants, the retailers, airlines, become frustrated with the service or with the lack of innovation or the speed of innovation most frequently, and then they go to smaller providers, more robust. Then those smaller providers grow and have the same effect again. They get acquired by big institutions, and again things slow down. So I see that it seems to be an evolving circle. Whilst there's a lot of acquisition and mergers, for each merger there's a lot of new startups. Question is how many of those will succeed, and as I said, I feel that experience in payments is quite a necessary part to that innovation. You need to understand what you can do yourselves, where you need to have partners, potentially for, as I mentioned earlier, regulatory reasons. You maybe work with somebody who's already licensed to do certain things, and that can make that kind of the start of the business and the initial market offering a lot easier to support.
And speaking of the travel industry, how much does the industry understand the solutions available to their payment and fraud challenges? How's the industry doing in educating and marketing to the travel industry at large?
There is a lot of information. To give you an example, when I started at Microsoft more than 10 years ago, I really struggled to seek out payment conferences to go and learn about some alternative payment methods. Now that's not a problem with how many you can go to, because practically the last couple of months I've been at a conference pretty much 2 times a week in a variety of countries. I've just, as I was saying, I've just come back from Money 2020 in Vegas. There's definitely a lot of information. So it's not the question whether the industry is educating. I think industry often is kind of quite mainstream and doesn't necessarily understand the travel sector problems. So my experience is that travel sector has very specific problems in both the fraud management and the payments management. A lot of it is because many airlines are a traditional business. They've got old systems, and you can only do that much with those systems. So they rely on the newer payment providers to make it easier for them to manage those differences by taking some of the technical burden away from them. That doesn't always happen. Equally with the fraud management, the fraud in airline industry is very different from that in retail. There's different patterns. The tickets are bought in advance. There is a lot of liability as far as the acquiring of traditional payments is concerned by credit cards. So that often costs airlines a lot of money in collateral to their acquirers. So I do feel that there's enough information on payments, but what I do feel is that not many payment providers spend a lot of time understanding each particular vertical before designing their products. Again, hopefully this is where my services help. There are some, and the ones that do that, they tend to be very successful with airlines. And again, if you look at all the PSPs, there's only about half a dozen that work specifically with airlines, and that's because they dedicated some time and effort to it.
And I presume the focus being airlines, because it's tough enough just to understand them, much less move on to hospitality, tour operators, cruise lines, and the others.
Indeed. I think there's a lot of different models. For example, in the hotel industry, you have the franchises, you have the big brands, and then you have the small boutique hotels. They all need different approach. Many of them cannot get the deals that some of the big guys are getting. It's quite hard to negotiate with a payment company, so that's definitely a challenge. There's a big drive in the hotel industry for prepaid part of the business, so getting the bookings paid at the time of the booking. There's a lot of alternative payment methods which can facilitate that with a lot lower risk, for example. So that's narrow. But I find that often, we're now in the US. I should think that some, boutique hotels somewhere in Ohio or Nebraska will not have access to the payment information like you and I have, going to all these payment conferences. So getting that information out there, I think, is a challenge.
Masha Cilliers, Payment Options Consulting, thank you very much.
Thank you.